How could a good God allow evil and suffering? So yeah, isn't this the question? I mean, really, how many more questions do you hear? Sometimes it's asked in different ways. Of all the obstacles, supposedly, we know there's all kinds of reasons why people don't believe. And a lot of them are not intellectual difficulties, they're moral difficulties, they're human depravity. It's that which keeps us in rebellion against God. But in terms of intellectual and even emotional arguments, what's more common and actually what's more powerful than how could a good God allow evil and suffering? For instance, Vec and Samwan Tang, who I met in Cambodia years ago, who walked me through the killing fields. And virtually every member of both of their families, siblings, parents, were murdered in the killing fields in Cambodia. He's a pastor there. And they're telling me their stories as we are standing with piles of skulls. It's one of those experiences, the killing fields and other places that I've been in the world, and some of you have been, Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. I'm told the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. is very powerful as well. Just extraordinary evil. And yet we believe in a good God. How does that even fit? This isn't a good picture. It got a little distorted and grainy there. But this is the Staines family, Graham Staines, and his wife Gladys, who I know, and his daughter Esther, and his two sons, and a missionary in India who some years ago, in fact, are any of you familiar with my fiction, my novel Safely Home? It's set in China and it's about persecution, but I dedicated the book to the Staines family because Graham was with his two sons not long after this picture was taken one night, and they were huddled up in a car because they were attacked by a violent Hindu mob in India, and the vehicle that they were in was burned. And when they recovered their bodies, obviously they were dead. Graham's arms were around his two sons. Okay, these are the people who serve you, Lord. I mean, they're not bad people, they're good people. They're doing what you want. How could you permit something like this to happen if you're all good and you're all sovereign? It doesn't make sense. So these are the questions people ask. The logic goes like this. There may be no God at all. Okay, that's a possibility. So let's just start from scratch. Throw out all beliefs and blank slate. Maybe there's no God at all. And there may be a God who's all good. And there may be a God even who is all powerful. But the logic goes, and this is the problem of evil, but there cannot be a God who is both all good and all powerful. Why? Go ahead, answer that question. I mean, the way that worldview, the problem of evil and suffering. Why could there not be a God who is both all good and all powerful? Such a God could not allow this kind of evil and suffering. I mean, he couldn't. So he must be limited in his goodness or limited in his power, or he must not exist at all. Okay, so now, all beliefs aside, and you know that when I'm saying that, I don't really mean forget you're a Christian and forget God's word is inspired. This is an apologetic sort of context here that we're thinking in. Isn't that fairly good logic on the face of it? I mean, if you're a kid and you grow up in a Christian home, or any home, and you're in college and that's what your professor says, and says what I said before, well, would you permit this little girl to be raped if you had the power to, and you were good and you would not, well, no, of course not. Well, then you must be better, more moral, more good than this God you profess to believe in, who you say is all good and all powerful. It makes no sense. And so the kid that grows up in the Christian home and goes to his Christian church, if he has not yet faced head-on the reality of terrible suffering in the world, and if he has not faced the biblical teaching and examples, and has not done some logical and theological thinking and training that he has received in his or her own home and or church, hopefully both, is it any wonder why kids from Christian homes lose their faith in a secular environment, college? It isn't. So part of the fault, obviously, you could say, well, then they shouldn't be going to that college. Well, that may be true enough, but the other real part of the fault is, what are we doing as Christian churches and Christian families to raise up kids who have no perception of the big issues of life, the big theological, philosophical, worldview issues? Are like, hearing Sunday school stories is not enough. Those stories are great. Now, I did not grow up in a Christian home. Came to Christ when I was in high school, heard the gospel for the first time when I was in high school. But I immediately read, one of the first books I read was C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain. I mean, I'm a high schooler and I'm reading The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. I mean, I didn't start with the Chronicles of Narnia. I just saw it in a store. I thought, The Problem of Pain. And I looked at it and go, suffering in this world. And I went, yeah, why, God? Well, I'm real glad I was reading C.S. Lewis instead of somebody else.